"Do you have any expired cake?" Daniel stood trembling in the doorway of the bakery, his 3-year-old sister strapped to his back with a faded bedsheet. He had spent 6 hours in the cold collecting bottles and cans for his mother's birthday, $4.62 pressed into his freezing palm, holding on to a small stubborn hope that someone might give him cake that would be thrown away anyway. But the baker didn't hesitate. "We don't give away product." Daniel swallowed the shame and turned toward the door, until a deep voice broke the silence. "Wait." An elderly billionaire stood up from a corner table and reached for his wallet. What he did next would change their lives forever. This story is created to share meaningful life lessons with you. We said our memory stories, and we said are glad you said are here. The snow fell thick and heavy that December evening, turning the streets of downtown Columbus into a winter painting of white and shadow. Ice crystals caught the warm golden glow from Henderson's bakery windows, making the whole storefront shimmer like something straight out of a dream. Inside, families celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, their laughter muffled by the triple-pane glass and the soft, steady blanket of accumulating snow. Children pressed their small noses against the display cases, pointing at towering cakes covered in buttercream rosettes and sugar pearls, treats that cost more than some families spent on groceries for an entire month. Outside, pressed against the rough brick wall beside the entrance, 10-year-old Daniel Hayes tried to make himself invisible. His thin jacket had come from a church donation bin at least 3 winters ago, the synthetic filling long since compressed into useless flat batting that did almost nothing against the Ohio cold. The holes in his sneakers let in slush with every shuffling step, turning his socks into freezing sponges that squelched softly when he shifted his weight. His stomach had stopped its growling hours earlier, settling into that hollow, familiar ache he'd learned to carry like a stone wedged permanently behind his ribs. But Daniel's discomfort was secondary. It had been secondary for a long time now. Strapped to his back with a worn bedsheet knotted carefully across his chest was his little sister Lily, 3 years old, bundled in every spare piece of clothing Daniel had been able to find that morning. 2 mismatched mittens. A knitted hat 2 sizes too big that kept sliding down over her eyes. A fleece zip-up that had once been Daniel's own, which swallowed her small body almost entirely. Lily had her face pressed against her brother's neck, her breath coming out in soft little puffs that Daniel could feel even through the cold. She'd been quiet for the last hour, drifting in and out of light, exhausted sleep, lulled by the rhythm of her brother's walking the way she always was. She'd been riding on his back since she learned to hold on. It was as natural to both of them as breathing. She wasn't crying. She'd learned, somehow, even at 3 years old, that crying used up warmth she couldn't afford to waste. Daniel adjusted the knotted sheet across his chest for what felt like the 100th time that evening and looked through the frosted window at the display case inside Henderson's bakery. On the lowest shelf, past the gleaming 4-tier wedding cakes and the custom orders wrapped in silver ribbon, there had to be, something left over from yesterday. Something nobody wanted anymore. Something headed for the trash before morning. His mother's birthday was today, December 17th. Carol Hayes was 41 years old, lying in the back bedroom of their 2-room apartment on Glendale Avenue, unable to stand without gripping the wall, unable to work, unable to do much of anything except breathe carefully and try to smile when her children came in to check on her. The workplace accident 18 months ago had shattered 3 vertebrae in her lower back and left nerve damage that the doctors described in careful, measured language that Daniel had taught himself to translate into plain truth. She would not get better on her own. Not without surgery, not without rehabilitation, not without money they did not have and could not see any way of getting. Before the accident, Carol Hayes had been a certified nursing assistant at Mercy General Hospital for 8 years, working double shifts, keeping her small family afloat with the disciplined love of a woman who had decided early that hardship was not an excuse to stop showing up. She had been the kind of CNA who remembered every patient's birthday, who brought homemade soup on her own time, who held hands in the dark and sang softly to people who had no one else in the world to sing to them. She had been exceptional at her job in the quiet way that people are exceptional when they are doing exactly what they were made to do. Then there was the accident. The patient lift that had been flagged for maintenance 3 separate times by 3 different staff members over the course of 7 months and never once serviced. the equipment failing mid-transfer, the patient beginning to fall. Carol catching him, taking the full impact across her lower back, crumpling to the floor of the East Wing hallway while the patient she'd just saved stood over her asking if she was all right. She had lost her job along with her health. The hospital placed her on medical leave, which became unpaid leave, which became termination when it became clear she could not return within the window the hospital's policy allowed. The same hospital whose faulty equipment had put her on the floor in the first place. The insurance company had begun denying her workers' compensation claim within 60 days of the accident, citing what they called a pre-existing condition, a claim that was not only false but that Carol had the medical records to disprove. She had never had a back problem in her life before that afternoon on the East Wing. She knew it. Her doctors knew it. The insurance company knew it too, which was exactly why their letters were so carefully worded. She knew the system well enough to understand what was happening. 8 years of hospital work had taught her exactly how insurance companies operated, exactly how claims got buried under paperwork and delays and denial letters designed to exhaust people into giving up. She had even tried to navigate the appeals process herself at first, filling out forms from bed, organizing everything into a manila folder she kept under the mattress because the kitchen table was too far to reach on bad days. But knowing how the system worked and being able to fight it from a 2-room apartment with no income and 2 children and chronic pain that made sitting upright for more than 20 minutes feel like a feat, those were 2 entirely different things. The free clinic gave her what medications they could. They could not give her insulin consistently, because insulin was expensive even at reduced cost and the clinic's supply was limited and unpredictable. On the months when the numbers simply did not work, when it came down to her medications or her children's food, Carol had quietly made her choice. She had not told Daniel this. She told Daniel very little about the full weight of what she was managing, because Daniel was already managing too much. Then 9 months after the accident, there was the other thing. His father had left. Daniel did not think about this directly if he could help it. Thinking about it directly made something hot and ugly rise up in his chest that he did not have room for. Kevin Hayes had stayed for those 9 months, staying in the way that someone stays when they are already more than halfway gone, present in the apartment but absent from everything that mattered. He had come home later and later. He had looked at the medical bills spread across the kitchen table and then looked away. He had grown quieter and more distant as it became clear that Carol was not going to make a quick recovery, that the insurance fight was going to be long and grinding, that this was not a situation with an easy exit. One Tuesday morning in September 14 months ago, Daniel had come out of the bedroom he shared with Lily to find his father's coat gone from the hook by the door. A note on the kitchen table. 3 lines. "I'm sorry, I can't do this, I hope you'll be okay." Lily had been 22 months old. She did not remember him. She had never in any conversation Daniel could recall, asked about him. Daniel had read the note twice, folded it exactly in half, put it in the kitchen drawer. Then he had gone in to check on his mother, who was lying in bed with her eyes open and her face very still, and he had said, "Mom, what do you want for breakfast?" Because that was the thing that needed doing right then. And doing the thing that needed doing was how Daniel managed the feelings he could not afford to have. He was 10 years old. He had been managing things for a long time. That morning, the morning of his mother's birthday, December 17th, he had gotten Lily up and dressed her in her layers while she protested sleepily, made her oatmeal with the brown sugar she liked, checked on his mother, and brought her toast and water and the 2 medications the free clinic had been able to provide that month. He had not mentioned that the clinic had run out of one of her 3 regular prescriptions again, the expensive one, the one Carol always told him not to worry about when it happened. He had not mentioned it because there was nothing either of them could do about it today, and today was her birthday, and he was going to try to make it good. Then he had strapped Lily to his back with the bedsheet and taken the wire cart out into the cold. He had spent the whole day collecting bottles and cans, 6 hours, methodically working the streets he knew best, the park benches near the river where people left empties, the alley behind the sports bar on 5th Street, the recycling bins at the apartment complex on Morrow where the building super had told him he could come through before the truck arrived. Lily had ridden on his back the whole time, singing the 3 songs she knew in careful rotation, occasionally falling asleep, occasionally waking to report on things she observed from her elevated position. Daniel. Dog. I see it. Big dog. Very big. Daniel. Bird. Yep. Daniel. That man has a red coat. He does. 6 hours. Every bottle, every can. And when he cashed everything in at the recycling center on 5th Street at 4 in the afternoon, the total had come to $4.62. Not enough for a birthday cake. Not even close to enough for a cupcake from the gas station 2 blocks from their apartment, but through the frosted window of Henderson's bakery, there was the display case. And there was always, in any bakery at the end of the day, something left over, something going to waste. Daniel shifted Lily's weight, squared his shoulders and pushed open the heavy bakery door. Warm air rushed out, carrying vanilla and cinnamon and brown butter. It hit him like a wall, made him dizzy with hunger, made Lily stir against his back and make a small wondering sound as the warmth reached her face. The cheerful conversations inside dulled to uncomfortable murmurs. Customers turned. A woman near the door looked at the snow-covered boy dripping melted slush onto the clean tile floor, at the bundled toddler on his back, and looked away again quickly in the particular way of people who have decided not to see something. Behind the counter, a heavy-set man in his 50s with a neatly trimmed gray mustache and a white apron looked up from boxing a custom order. His eyes did a quick practiced assessment. His face settled into the expression of someone who has already reached a conclusion before a single word has been spoken. "Can I help you?" Daniel's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Do you have any expired cake? Anything from yesterday or the day before that you're going to throw out tonight?" The man's expression did not change. "What? Old cake." Daniel said it louder this time, his words coming out in the careful, rehearsed rush of someone who has practiced exactly what to say and how to say it on the walkover. "Stuff nobody's going to buy anymore. Stuff that was going to get tossed. It's my mom's birthday, and I saved up what I could, but I don't have enough for a real cake, and I thought maybe the leftover stuff. We don't give away product here." The man crossed his arms over his apron. "If you want something you pay the price like everyone else. I have $4.62. Daniel held out his palm, the single crumpled bill, the coins, the complete evidence of 6 hours of work. "I know it's not enough for a real one, but if it was going to get thrown out anyway, son." The man's voice dropped into impatience. "We don't sell day-old, we don't have a discount shelf. If $4 is what you've got, the gas station down the street sells snack cakes. I have paying customers waiting." Lily had been quiet on Daniel's back throughout this exchange, watching the man behind the counter with the wide, unguarded attention of a 3-year-old who does not yet know she is supposed to look away from uncomfortable things. "Okay," Daniel said. Just that one word, not arguing, not pushing. He had learned that pushing rarely helped and cost energy he did not have. He turned toward the door. That was when the voice came from the corner table by the window, deep, unhurried. The quiet authority of someone who has spent a lifetime being the person in the room that other people listen to, and who has learned to use that authority carefully. "Hold on, son." A man stood from the corner booth, setting down his coffee cup with slow, deliberate precision. He was tall, 66 years old, though he carried it well, with silver white hair brushed back from a weathered face lined deeply around the eyes and mouth. Lines that spoke not just of age, but of specific sustained grief. He wore a charcoal wool overcoat that had been made for him specifically, and dark leather shoes polished to a careful shine. But his eyes were something else entirely. Dark and very still and profoundly sad. The eyes of a man who understood from the inside what it meant to press your face against the glass of a life you could see but not reach. His name was Edward Callahan. He had been sitting in that corner booth for 2 hours and 20 minutes, nursing coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. He came here sometimes, when the house in Worthington Hills became too quiet to tolerate. When the silence in the 7-bedroom house moved through the hallways like something with weight and intention. When he needed to be near other people's laughter, even borrowed laughter, even laughter that had nothing whatsoever to do with him. He was aware that this was not a healthy way to spend an evening. He had been aware of this for 4 years and had continued doing it anyway, because the alternative was sitting alone in that house, and there were only so many hours of that a person could manage before the silence started talking back. Edward Callahan had built Callahan Medical Group from a single outpatient clinic on the east side of Columbus into one of the largest private healthcare networks in the state of Ohio. 40 years of 14-hour days and calculated risk and relentless discipline, and the particular focused energy of a man who had decided very young that he was going to build something that lasted. He was worth by any honest accounting somewhere in the neighborhood of $800 million. He had the house and the car, and every material thing the world considered worth having. He had been the loneliest man in Columbus for 4 years running. His wife Patricia had died 4 years ago. Not suddenly, not the merciful, clean kind of death that people sometimes got. The slow kind. A rare autoimmune condition that spent 3 years dismantling her body with meticulous, indifferent precision while Edward sat beside her hospital bed and refused to leave except when she specifically made him. He had flown in specialists from Johns Hopkins and the Mayo Clinic. He had tracked down a research physician in Zurich whose experimental protocol, when Patricia agreed to try it, bought them 8 more months together, 8 months of Patricia being fully, completely herself. Funny and sharp and endlessly curious about other people's stories, the kind of woman who made every single person she spoke to feel like the most interesting person in the room. Then the 8 months ended. They had never had children. Patricia had wanted them, and Edward had always said next year, after this acquisition, after this expansion, after this next thing on the list that never got shorter. And then the list stopped mattering entirely, and the rooms of the house in Worthington Hills stayed empty, and Edward went back to work because work was the only thing in his life that still had a shape he could hold on to. He had a younger sister, Catherine, who lived in Cincinnati and called every week and had driven up a dozen times in the first year after Patricia died, sitting with him in the kitchen making coffee. Neither of them drank, talking and not talking in equal measure. He had his mother, Teresa, 78 years old and sharp as a tack, who lived in Scottsdale and who told him plainly on more than one occasion that isolating himself in that house was going to kill him faster than any illness. He had people who loved him, who tried to reach him, who called and visited and invited. He had built a wall anyway, not out of anger toward them, out of the specific suffocating exhaustion of grief, which uses up every social resource a person has, and leaves nothing for the ordinary work of being someone's son or brother or friend. He had told himself he would reach back out when he felt better. 4 years had passed and he had not felt better. He had stopped going to Catherine's for holidays after the 2nd year, because being around her family, her husband Michael, her 3 children, the noise and warmth of a household that was fully, obviously alive, made the emptiness in his own chest feel like a physical wound. He kept reopening by proximity. He still held his seat on the board of the parent network that owned Mercy General and several other regional hospitals, not out of any real engagement with the work, but because he retained a significant ownership stake, and stepping down entirely would have required a level of deliberate decision-making he hadn't been capable of for years. His name on the letterhead, his vote at quarterly meetings he attended by phone, half listening. It was the last thread connecting him to the company he had built, and he had not yet found the will to cut it. He had a cardiologist, Dr. Nancy Hawkins, who had been monitoring a mild arrhythmia for 2 years and who, at his last appointment 3 months ago, had told him in the careful language of a physician who has learned to say difficult things gently, "Edward, your heart is keeping a tally." The grief, the isolation, the work pace, the sleep deprivation, none of these things are free. At some point I'm going to be telling you something more serious than what I'm telling you today, and I'd like to delay that conversation as long as possible. He had thanked her, driven home, and not changed anything. He knew in a general way that he was not all right. He had known this for 4 years. Knowing it and doing something about it were, it turned out, entirely separate skills. Now he sat in a bakery on a Tuesday night watching a 10-year-old boy with a toddler on his back ask for expired cake, and something in the sealed-off center of his chest cracked open like river ice at the first hard push of spring. He stood up. "Hold on, son." The boy turned. His eyes did a quick, careful assessment, not frightened exactly, but measuring. The eyes of a child who had learned to evaluate strangers quickly and without sentiment, who had enough experience with disappointment to approach new situations with calibrated caution rather than open hope. "Today is your mother's birthday?" Edward said. "Yes, sir." "How old is she?" 41. Edward looked at the little girl on the boy's back. She had turned her head toward him, the oversized knitted hat slightly askew, one mittened hand curled around her brother's collar. She looked at him with the enormous, uncomplicated attention of a 3-year-old making a genuine assessment, not shy, not clingy, just looking, taking him in the way children do when they haven't yet learned to pretend they aren't. He turned to the man behind the counter. "I'll take the best cake you have in the display case right now." The baker blinked. "Sir, the front piece is a custom order for the Whitfield anniversary. I'll pay triple the listed price and cover the cost of a same-day replacement with delivery to the Whitfields, whatever it takes." His voice was measured and final, the voice of a man who had been in enough rooms to know that this particular tone of absolute calm was far more effective than volume. "This boy needs a birthday cake for his mother, sir." "I really don't. What's the price on the display cake?" A pause. $95. "But here's 300. His wallet was already open. He set 3 bills on the counter without looking at them. "Keep the difference after the replacement delivery. Consider it an inconvenience fee." The baker looked at the money, looked at Daniel, looked at Lily, who was watching this entire negotiation with the focused interest of a small person who understands that something important is happening. His shoulders came down slowly from around his ears. 5 minutes, he said. Daniel had gone very still. "Sir, you don't have to. I only asked for something that was going to be thrown away. You don't have to do all this." Edward crouched down so he was at eye level with the boy. His knees sent their familiar complaint, 66 years old and too many years at a desk, but he got down there anyway and stayed there. "What's your name, Daniel?" "Daniel Hayes." "I'm Edward." He held out his hand. Daniel shook it, a firm practiced handshake with real grip to it, the handshake of a boy who had been dealing with adults on adult terms for longer than was fair, and had learned to meet them where they were. "Happy birthday to your mother, Daniel." The boy's jaw worked for a moment. Something moved across his face, a wave of feeling that he caught and controlled before it could fully surface, with the particular practiced discipline of a child who has learned that losing control is a luxury he cannot afford. "She's sick," he said, because the gratitude was too large for a simple thank you and the words needed somewhere to go. "She had a work accident a year and a half ago. She can't stand for long. She can't work. She always made a cake for me and Lily on our birthdays, even when things were hard. She'd put real candles in it and everything." He stopped, swallowed once. "I wanted to do that for her. Then she should have one," Edward said, as simple as that. Lily, from her position on Daniel's back, leaned forward and regarded Edward with the gravity of someone conducting a serious and final evaluation. Then she held out her mittened hand. Edward, without thinking about it, shook it. "Hi," Lily said. "Hello," Edward said. "What's your name?" "Lily." "That's a very good name." She considered this with appropriate seriousness. "I know," she said, and leaned back against her brother's neck. Something shifted in Edward's chest, not dramatically, not all at once, more like the first small movement of something that has been frozen for a very long time, registering the change in temperature before the thaw has properly begun. The baker returned with an enormous white box tied with silver ribbon. Inside was a 4-tier cake in pale ivory fondant with cascading blue sugar flowers and delicate gold leaf accents along each tier, a cake designed for a golden anniversary, beautiful and excessive and exactly right. Edward took the box and handed it carefully to Daniel, who accepted it with both arms pressed together, cradling it against his chest the way you hold something you are afraid to drop. Lily reached out one mittened hand and touched the silver ribbon with one finger, gently, like she was checking whether it was real. "Thank you," Daniel said. "Thank you so much. You're welcome." Edward stood, but he did not move toward the door. Something in him, something that had been sealed shut for 4 years, could not let this moment simply end. He had driven to this bakery tonight, because he could not stand the silence of his house for one more evening. He had not expected to find anything here except borrowed warmth. He certainly hadn't expected this. "Daniel," he said, "have you and your sister eaten dinner tonight?" The boy's eyes went briefly to the floor. "No, sir. We were out all day. I was going to figure something out when we got home." Lily made a small sound against Daniel's neck, not a word, just a sound, hunger announcing itself in the uncomplicated way of 3-year-olds. "Would you let me buy you dinner? A real meal, not just cake, somewhere close by, somewhere busy with lots of people around." He saw the careful hesitation in Daniel's face and added, "I just want to make sure you both eat something before you head home." Daniel's eyes went to the window, then back to Edward. The calculation was quick and unsentimental, not distrust exactly, but the practical assessment of someone who has learned to weigh every offer carefully against its likely cost. "Okay," he said, "but can we bring something back for my mom?
She hasn't eaten much today. She has trouble getting to the kitchen on bad pain days. Edward looked at this boy, who had spent 6 hours in the December cold carrying his sister on his back, collecting bottles and cans, coming up with $4.62, and whose first thought about dinner was making sure his mother had some. "We'll bring her a feast," Edward said. "I promise." They went to a family restaurant 3 blocks away, warm and bright and full of the noise of a Tuesday evening crowd. Daniel settled into the booth with the ease of long practice, shifting Lily from his back to the seat beside him in one smooth motion, adjusting her hat, checking that her mittens were still attached. Lily immediately seized the paper menu and began turning it over and examining it with great seriousness. "She can't read yet," Daniel said. "She looks close," Edward said. Lily looked up. "I know some letters. D is for Daniel, L is for Lily." She thought hard. S is for snow. 3 letters, Edward said gravely. "That's excellent progress." She looked satisfied and returned to the menu. He ordered Lily a grilled cheese with apple slices and chocolate milk. He ordered Daniel a double cheeseburger with fries and a strawberry milkshake. He ordered soup and a chicken sandwich and a full pasta dinner for Carol, packed to go, along with extra containers. Between bites, Daniel eating with the focused, grateful attention of someone who has been genuinely hungry since morning, he asked about the family. "Tell me about your mother." Daniel was quiet for a moment, organizing his thoughts in the methodical way he did everything. "Her name is Carol Hayes. She was a CNA at Mercy General for 8 years. She loved it. She talked about her patients the way some people talk about their own family, like they were people she'd actually chosen to care about." He paused. "The accident was 18 months ago. Equipment failure, a patient lift that had been reported for maintenance 3 times and never fixed. She caught the patient when the lift gave out and took all the impact herself. 3 vertebrae." He said it flatly, the way he'd said it many times, the emotion temporarily set aside in service of the facts. "The insurance company has been denying her workers' comp claim since almost the beginning. They say it's a pre-existing condition, which isn't true. She never had a back problem before that day." "Which hospital?" "Mercy General, where she worked." Edward set his cup down carefully. "Mercy General." His company had completed the acquisition of Mercy General's parent network 3 years ago. He retained his board seat because of his ownership stake, present in name if not in spirit. But that was not what made his hand pause on the cup. "What floor did she work?" he said.
Daniel glanced at him, mildly puzzled by the specificity of the question. "3rd floor east wing mostly. That's what she always said." "Why?" Edward was quiet for a moment. He wasn't certain, not yet. But something in him had already begun to recognize the shape of the answer, the way you recognize a piece of music before you can name it. "I'm not sure yet," he said honestly. "Tell me more about her. Not the accident, her. What she was like at work." Daniel looked at him with those careful eyes, considering. "She talked about her patients the way other people talk about their neighbors. Like she actually knew them, not just their charts. She'd come home from a shift and be quiet for a while, like she was carrying something. And then she'd tell me about someone, not the medical stuff, just who they were. Whether their family came to visit. Whether they seemed lonely." He paused. "She never talked about it like it was a job." "No," Edward said quietly. "I don't imagine she did. 4 years ago, during the worst stretch of Patricia's illness, she had spent 11 days at Mercy General during a severe autoimmune flare. Edward had been there for almost every one of those days and most of those nights. The nursing staff on the 3rd floor east wing had become familiar presences. People he nodded to in the hallway. People whose competence and steadiness he had observed with the particular attention of a man whose wife's well-being depended on them completely. There had been one CNA who stood apart from the others. He remembered her not by a single physical detail, but by the quality of her presence, the way she moved through the ward with an efficiency that never felt rushed, the way she spoke to Patricia with full attention every single time, as though Patricia were the only patient she had, and this was the only moment in the day. She had been the one who caught Patricia's latex allergy, had noticed a mild reaction early before it became serious, flagged it quietly to the nursing team with exactly the right degree of urgency, stayed past the end of her shift on her own time to make sure the substitution went smoothly. She had sat with Patricia during one particular bad night when Edward had gone home to shower and change and Patricia had woken frightened and disoriented and alone. When he had come back the next morning, Patricia had told him about it. She had said, "A nursing assistant named Carol sat with me all night. She held my hand and talked to me about her kids. She talked about her little boy like he was the most remarkable person she'd ever met." Edward had tried to find Carol afterward, to thank her properly. He'd asked at the nurse's station and been told she had already left for the day. He'd meant to come back. Patricia had taken a bad turn that week, and the search for Carol had gotten lost in the gathering urgency of everything else. He had never stopped thinking about what Patricia had told him. He looked at this boy across the table, at the dark hair and the careful eyes, and felt the pieces settle into place with the quiet certainty of something that had always been true and was only now being recognized. "Daniel," he said, "I think your mother may have helped save my wife's life." The booth went very quiet. Even Lily seemed to sense the shift. She set down her grilled cheese and looked between her brother and this man with the careful attention of a small child reading a room. Daniel put his fork down. "What?" he said. Edward told him. He was careful about the medical details, careful about what was right to share with a 10-year-old. He told him about the 11 days at Mercy General. About the latex allergy that could have become serious and hadn't, because of one nursing assistant who noticed early and stayed late. About the night Patricia woke frightened and alone, and the woman named Carol who stayed with her until morning. She talked to Patricia about her children. Edward said, "Patricia told me afterward. She said this CNA, Carol, talked about her kids the way some people talk about things they love most in the world. She said there was a little girl and a little boy who was always building things, always making something out of whatever he could find, who was serious and looked after his sister." Something shifted in Daniel's face. He picked up his fork but didn't use it. "She never mentioned it," he said finally. "She never talked about the things she did for people at work. She'd come home sometimes and be quiet for a while. But she never said what it was." A pause. "She's like that. She does things and doesn't talk about them. People who give quietly are the best kind," Edward said. "They do it because they can't help themselves. Not for recognition, just because someone needed something and they were there." Daniel looked out the window at the dark Columbus Street, at the snow falling steadily through the restaurant light. "She needs surgery," he said. "The doctors have been saying it for over a year. If she gets it, the right surgery, real rehabilitation after, she might be able to walk without pain again, might be able to work again." He paused. "The insurance company keeps saying pre-existing condition. We have records that prove she never had a back problem before the accident. But we don't have money for a lawyer to fight them properly, and the legal aid attorney who took our case is good, but he's carrying 40 other cases, and..." He stopped himself. "Sorry. I'm not trying to make it your problem." "Tell me everything," Edward said. So Daniel did. He told him about the maintenance records, the 3 filed requests on the lift equipment, 7 months apart, none of them acted on. He told Edward that he had read the insurance carrier's accident investigation summary carefully and found 2 factual inaccuracies, which he had written down and given to the legal aid attorney, who had been quietly impressed and said he wished more clients did that. He told him about the medical bills organized on the kitchen table by amount owed, smallest to largest, because that was how Carol made them feel manageable. He told him about the free clinic and the medications, how they covered some things some months but not everything every month, and how his mother never made a fuss about the gaps even though Daniel had figured out on his own what the gaps probably cost her. He told him about his father. He told it the way he told most hard things. Plainly, without embellishment, the emotion compressed down to something small and portable. Kevin Hayes had left 14 months ago. A note on the kitchen table, 3 lines. Lily had been 22 months old. She didn't remember him. She had never asked about him, not once. He couldn't handle it, Daniel said. When Mom got hurt and it became clear it was going to be a long thing, not a quick thing, he stopped. He didn't hurt us. He just left. He looked down at his plate. "I don't know if it's better or worse that Lily doesn't remember him." Edward was quiet for a moment, keeping his thoughts about Kevin Hayes carefully to himself. "Your mother never complained to you," he said. "About any of it, never. Absolutely certain. She talks about what we're going to do next, what the plan is. She doesn't talk about what she can't change. Lily had been listening in the way that 3-year-olds listen, apparently occupied with her apple slices, but tracking everything with her peripheral attention. Now she looked directly at Edward. "Are you our friend now?" she asked. It was the question only very small children can ask, straight through every protective layer. No awareness that it might be too large for a restaurant booth, no anticipation of rejection. Just the clean, direct question itself. Edward looked at her. At this 3-year-old girl who had ridden on her brother's back all day in the cold without complaint, who had shaken his hand in the bakery like it was the most natural thing in the world, who was now waiting for his answer with the patient certainty of someone who expects the world to respond to honest questions with honest answers. "Yes," he said. "I am." She nodded satisfied. She returned to her apple slices. Daniel was watching Edward with those careful eyes. "I'm going to help your family," Edward said. "Tonight is just the beginning. Will you let me?" The boy looked at him for a long moment, the measured look of a child who has been disappointed by adults enough times to have developed reasonable self-protective skepticism about offers that sound too good. "Why?" he asked. "You don't know us." "I know your mother," Edward said. "I know what kind of person she is. I know that she sat with my wife in the middle of the night when my wife was frightened and alone, and she did it because someone needed something and she was there. That's who she is. And I know that someone like that deserves to have someone show up for her." He paused. "I've been trying to figure out how to repay that kindness for 4 years. I just didn't know to whom. And then your sister shook my hand in a bakery." Daniel was quiet. "Then she'd say you don't have to repay it. That's not why she did it." "I know," Edward said. "That's exactly why she deserves to have it returned." A long pause. "Okay," Daniel said. "Yeah. Okay." They packed food into containers, enough for Carol, and then more because Edward had watched the way Daniel ate and understood that this family had been hungry for longer than just today. At the grocery store 2 blocks from the restaurant, he bought a full week of real food: eggs, bread, milk, butter, coffee, fresh fruit, peanut butter, oatmeal, frozen meals that only needed heating, orange juice, children's vitamins. At the pharmacy on the corner, he filled Carol's 3 regular medications completely, not partial fills, not substitutions, all 3, properly dosed, properly stocked. Daniel watched all of this with an expression Edward was beginning to recognize, not quite disbelief, not quite relief, something in between, the look of someone recalibrating what they understand to be possible. Lily fell asleep on Daniel's back somewhere between the grocery store and the car, her face heavy and warm against his neck. Daniel shifted her weight with the automatic, unconscious ease of someone who had been doing exactly this since she was born, a motion as natural as breathing, requiring no thought. The apartment building on Glendale Avenue was on the 3rd floor of a structure that had once been respectable and was maintaining the memory of that with some effort. The hallway light on the 2nd landing had been out for weeks. The hallway smelled of industrial cleaner doing its best against the accumulated closeness of many people in limited space. Daniel unlocked the apartment door with practiced quiet and called softly, "Mom, we're home. I brought someone." The apartment was small, a main room that served as living room and kitchen combined, a narrow bathroom, 2 bedrooms, with a door between them that didn't close all the way. It was clean in the particular way of people who have learned to take exacting care of very little. Above the kitchen table, a paper banner hung slightly crooked, "Happy Birthday Mama," in red crayon, each letter a slightly different size. Lily's work, clearly, with Daniel holding the paper steady. Carol Hayes was in the back bedroom, sitting up against the headboard with a library book open on her lap and a glass of water on the nightstand that Daniel had clearly left within reach before he went out that morning. She was wearing a flannel robe and wool socks, and she had the particular careful stillness of someone who has learned to exist within a range of movement that does not trigger the worst of the pain. She was thinner than she should have been. The lines of her face spoke of 18 months of chronic pain in the way that sustained pain marks people, not dramatically, but thoroughly, in ways that go all the way down. But when her eyes came up from the book and found Daniel in the doorway, they were immediately and completely present, clear and warm, and focused entirely on her son. "Baby." Her voice was soft with relief. "You were out so long, I was starting to worry." Then she saw the white box with the silver ribbon. Then she saw the man standing behind Daniel. She went still. "Mom," Daniel said, "his name is Edward. He helped me get you a birthday cake, and he thinks he met you before." When his wife was a patient at Mercy General, Carol looked at Edward. Her eyes did the same careful, unhurried assessment her son's did, the same quality of evaluation, the same willingness to hold a conclusion in suspension until the evidence was fully in. It was unmistakably where Daniel had learned it. "Carol Hayes," Edward said. "Third floor East Wing. About 4 years ago, you were the one who caught my wife's latex allergy before it became serious. You stayed with her one night when I wasn't there, and she woke up frightened." Something shifted in Carol's face. Quiet and immediate. "Patricia," she said. "Yes. Patricia Callahan." She said it the way you say a name when you are placing a person carefully back in their proper place in memory. She was in the East Wing for 11 days. She was one of those patients you think about afterward. The kind who sees you as a person, not a uniform. She asked me questions every time I came in to check on her, real questions, the kind where she actually wanted the answers. A small pause. "She asked about my kids every single time. She told me," Edward said. "She talked about you after she came home. Said you'd sat with her the whole night. She woke up frightened. She asked me to stay." Carol's voice was straightforward about it, stating a fact without ornament. "She was scared and she didn't want to be alone, so I stayed." She looked at him steadily. "I would have done that for any patient." "I know," Edward said. "That's exactly the point." A silence passed between them, the particular silence of two people thinking about the same person who is no longer in the world, and finding they can share that silence without explanation. "I'm sorry for your loss," Carol said finally. "Truly, she was a remarkable woman, she was." Edward cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hayes, your son told me about the accident and the insurance situation. I have resources, legal resources, medical resources, that I'd like to put to work for your family. I'm not asking for anything in return. I'm asking if you'll let me help." Carol looked at her son. Daniel met her eyes steadily. Then she looked at Lily, still asleep and heavy on Daniel's back, one mitten dangling from its clip. She looked at the white box with the silver ribbon. "Sit down, Mr. Callahan," she said, nodding toward the wooden chair beside her bed. "You've clearly been standing up long enough. Tell me exactly what you're proposing, and tell me what you expect to get out of it. I need to hear that part too." He sat, and he answered that second question first, because it was the right question and she deserved a real answer to it. "I expect to feel like a person again," he said. "For the past 4 years I've been going through motions, running a company, attending meetings, sitting in bakeries alone at 9 in the evening, because I can't stand the silence of my own house. I built everything I built and then lost the only person it mattered to, and I haven't known what I was for since then. Tonight when I heard your son ask for that cake," he paused. "Something woke up. I don't want to let it go back to sleep. That's what I expect to get out of it. The chance to do something that actually matters." Carol was quiet for a long moment, then she nodded, once, slowly, the nod of someone who recognizes honesty and is choosing to meet it with equal honesty. "All right," she said, "now tell me exactly what you're proposing." He did, and Carol Hayes asked him specific, intelligent, well-organized questions. She asked about the attorneys he knew and their track records in workers' comp cases specifically. She asked about the medical specialists he'd mentioned. She asked about timelines and realistic outcomes. Edward answered everything honestly. He did not dress things up or promise outcomes he couldn't guarantee. Daniel sat cross-legged on the floor in the doorway the entire time, his homework notebook open on his knee, taking actual notes. Carol noticed. Edward noticed her noticing. "He does that," she said quietly, with a flicker of something in her face that was unmistakably pride. "He doesn't miss much." "I can see that," Edward said. At the end of 2 hours, Carol looked at him for a long moment. "Then I'm going to let you help us. But my children come before everything, before any plan, before any timeline. They come first." "Of course," Edward said. "That's not a condition. That's just obvious." "Nothing is obvious until it's said," Carol told him. "I say it anyway,
Then it said, "And I mean it." She nodded once, then as if the formal part of the evening were concluded, "There's food on the table that your son apparently brought, and I haven't eaten since noon. You're welcome to stay while we eat, Mr. Callahan, if you don't have somewhere to be." "I don't," Edward said. "And please call me Edward." "Edward," Carol said. "Hand me that folder under the mattress on your left. I want to show you the maintenance request documentation." He took the folder. He read every page while Daniel quietly heated food in the kitchen, and Lily woke and wandered in and climbed onto the bed beside her mother, with the confident possessive ease of a child who knows exactly where she belongs. The maintenance requests were worse than he had imagined. 3 reports over 7 months, each one clearly documenting a malfunction. Each one going precisely nowhere. "These are going to matter a great deal," he said. "I know," Carol said. "That's why I kept them." Before he left that night, Edward helped Daniel position the space heater safely in Carol's room. He made sure Lily was covered with her blanket on the couch where she'd fallen asleep mid-dinner. He stood in Carol's doorway and said, "Happy birthday, Carol. Your son carried his sister on his back all day in the December cold trying to get you a cake." Carol looked at Daniel, who was in the kitchen doing the dishes without being asked. "Daniel," she said softly. "It was just cans and bottles," he said without turning around. "It was nothing." "It was everything," Carol said, and then to Edward, in a voice that was quiet and direct in equal measure, "You look tired, Edward, not just tonight tired, the kind that goes all the way down." She paused. "Come back tomorrow if you want. Bring yourself not just groceries." He drove home through the slowing snow. The house in Worthington Hills was as quiet as it always was when he walked in. But for the first time in 4 years the quiet felt different, less like an absence and more like a pause before something. Most people don't realize how insurance companies actually win. It isn't by being right, it's by making the fight so long, so exhausting, so expensive in time and hope and dignity, that ordinary people simply stop. Carol Hayes had refused to stop, but there are limits to what one person can do alone, and those limits, after 18 months, were very close. Edward did not sleep that night. He sat at the desk in his home office and read every document from Carol's folder that Daniel had photographed and sent over: the denial letters, the appeals, the accident investigation summary, the maintenance requests. By midnight he was angry in the cold, contained way of someone who has spent 40 years building systems and knows with precision exactly how this one was being deliberately abused. At 2 in the morning he called his personal attorney, David Merritt. "David, first thing tomorrow I need you to reach Marcus Webb at Webb & Associates, workers' comp specialist, one of the best in the state. I need him to take a case immediately. I'll cover all fees personally." He laid out everything: the equipment failure, the 7 months of ignored maintenance requests, the pre-existing condition denial that the medical records directly contradicted, the 18 months of appeals going nowhere. David was quiet for a moment. "That denial language is going to fall apart under real legal scrutiny. I know. That's why I want Marcus. I also want someone looking at the hospital's civil liability. 3 filed maintenance requests and no action. Those records will be discoverable in litigation. You're looking at a significant civil case running alongside the workers' comp appeal." "I know. Get Marcus." "Edward, how are you connected to this family?" "Their mother once helped save Patricia's life," Edward said, "and nobody has helped them since." A pause on David's end. "Then I'll call Marcus first thing in the morning." He also called Dr. Raymond Foster, head of orthopedic surgery at Columbus Medical Center. He described Carol's injury, the imaging results, the denied surgical authorization. Raymond called back within the hour. "Send me everything. From what you're describing, this is a straightforward decompression procedure with a strong functional prognosis. The denial is indefensible on medical grounds. I'll write a letter and testify if it comes to that." He called Gerald Whitmore, the administrator at Mercy General, at 8 in the morning. That conversation was brief and cold. "I understand you have a workers' compensation claim from 18 months ago sitting in your carrier's appeals process," Edward said. "I understand the equipment involved had been flagged for maintenance 3 separate times before the incident." A long pause. Edward, that's a matter between the carrier and I'm aware of what it's a matter between. I'm also aware that I retain my board seat at the parent network. He kept his voice completely even. And I'm aware that when a workers' compensation denial involves equipment failure that was reported, documented, and never addressed, the hospital's own liability exposure is not a small issue. I'd like to see this resolved properly, for everyone's benefit. I'll have our legal team reach out to the carrier today. I'd appreciate that. He drove to Glendale Avenue that morning with groceries and medications. Daniel opened the door, looked at the bags and said, "You came back." I said I would. He sat at the kitchen table with Daniel and explained what he had set in motion, clearly, without over-promising. The attorney, the surgeon review, the hospital conversation. Daniel listened without interrupting. Then how long will the legal part take? Could be 6 months or more. The facts are strongly on your mother's side, but these cases move slowly. And the surgery. Dr. Foster needs to review her full records first, but based on what I described, he believes she's a strong candidate. Daniel absorbed this. Then quietly, she's been in pain every single day for 18 months. She never says so, but I see it in the mornings before she knows I'm watching. He looked at the table. I want her to not be in pain anymore. That's the main thing. That's what we're working toward, Edward said. He came back again the next day. And the day after that, he told himself it was to check on the case documents, to follow up on the medical records Carol needed to send to Dr. Foster, to make sure the medications were being taken properly. These things were true, they were not the whole truth. The whole truth was simpler, he had not wanted to go home. Carol noticed, she noticed in the precise, unsentimental way of a woman who had spent 8 years reading people. Reading the difference between a patient who was resting and one who was slipping, reading the difference between someone visiting out of obligation and someone who simply had nowhere else they wanted to be. On the 4th evening after Daniel had gone to bed and Lily was asleep and the apartment had grown quiet, she said, "Tell me about Patricia." Edward looked up from the folder of documents he had brought to review. "You don't have to," she said quickly. I noticed you never bring her up yourself, not since that first night. And I think about it sometimes because I knew her a little, in the way you know people when you're with them in hard moments. And I thought maybe you might want to talk about her to someone who actually met her. Edward was quiet for a long moment, then he talked about Patricia for the first time in 4 years to someone who was not an attorney or a physician or a board member. He talked about her the way you talk about someone when you have been holding their memory alone in a sealed room and someone finally opens the door, not carefully, not with any particular structure, just the truth of her spilling out into the warm kitchen of a small apartment on Glendale Avenue. How she laughed, what she thought about. The way she always had an opinion about everything and was usually right. The way she had made him feel for 40 years, like the best version of himself. Carol listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "She sounds like someone who knew exactly who she was." "She did," Edward said. "I don't think I realized how much I counted on that, until she was gone." "You're still figuring out who you are without her," Carol said. "Not a question. That's different from grief. That's reconstruction. It takes longer." He looked at her. 8 years of nursing, she said simply. "You learn to tell the difference." He drove home that night, and sat for a long time in the dark kitchen of his house in Worthington Hills. Then he got up, found the photograph he kept in the desk drawer, Patricia at 40 laughing at something just out of frame, and set it on the kitchen counter where he could see it. It was a small thing. But it was the first time in 4 years he had not needed the photograph to be hidden away somewhere private, somewhere grief-sized and contained. It was the first time he had been able to take it out and simply look at her. 3 days later a letter arrived at the Glendale Avenue apartment, official letterhead from the hospital's insurance carrier. Dense legal language that translated plainly to a threat. Third-party inquiries had been noted. Unauthorized advocacy could result in the denial status becoming permanent. Carol called Edward immediately. Her voice was controlled. The fear was underneath. "They're saying your involvement could make things permanently worse. That letter is designed to frighten you into going quiet." Edward said immediately. It has no legal authority behind it. The carrier is nervous because someone called Mercy General 3 days ago and they know the maintenance records are discoverable. That letter is a pressure tactic. It comes because people who have been improperly denying your claim for 18 months are suddenly worried. But what if, Carol, that letter exists because the system works by grinding people down until they stop fighting? It works because most people don't have anyone in their corner. He paused. You do now. Okay, Carol said. Okay. Marcus Webb reviewed the letter that afternoon. Legally hollow, a standard intimidation tactic. He filed a formal response within 48 hours that put the carrier on clear notice that the Hayes family had qualified legal representation and intended to pursue every available remedy under Ohio law. The carrier went quiet.
Then, 2 weeks later, the building on Glendale Avenue was sold to a new management company. New lease terms. The rent, effective 60 days out, would increase by $320 per month. $320 that Carol Hayes did not have. Daniel called Edward from a payphone outside the building. His phone had run out of prepaid minutes, his voice at its most carefully controlled, which Edward had learned was the register. Daniel's voice dropped into when he was most frightened. We're going to have to move, but moving is hard for Mom right now. And Lily's daycare is 2 blocks from here and she's finally settled in. And my school, he stopped himself. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to make it your problem. It is my problem, Edward said, because your family matters to me. Give me 24 hours. He bought the building. His attorney contacted the new management company within the day. An offer was made. By the following evening the building had changed hands again. He immediately suspended all rent increases for every tenant and commissioned a full assessment of the building's deferred maintenance, the heating system, the plumbing, the second-floor landing light, everything neglected for years. When he told Carol what he'd done, she was silent long enough that he checked the call was still connected. You bought our building, she said finally. I did, Edward, I know. You cannot just. Carol, gentle, but completely certain. You spent 8 years showing up for people who needed you, including my wife. The system failed you when you needed it. I have the resources to push back against that failure. This is what pushing back looks like. He paused. Let me do this. A long silence. Then Carol said, Patricia would have liked you doing this. I know, Edward said quietly. That's part of why I'm doing it. Winter moved slowly into spring. Marcus Webb worked the case with steady, methodical expertise. Dr. Foster reviewed Carol's complete records and produced a 12-page letter that outlined in precise medical language exactly why the surgical denial was not only medically unsupportable but potentially actionable. The carrier, facing combined pressure from multiple directions and the clear signal that Edward Callahan was not going to lose interest, began to move. In May, nearly 5 months after that December night, the carrier approved the surgical authorization. Carol called Edward from the consultation where Dr. Foster had given her the news. Her voice was different than he had ever heard it. Lighter. They approved it, she said. Surgery in 6 weeks. He exhaled slowly. Carol, that's very good news. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up. You're not going to wake up. It's real. I wanted to tell you first, she said. Before the kids. Is that strange? No, he said. Not at all. The surgery was a Thursday morning in late June. Edward drove Carol to the hospital at 5 in the morning, Daniel and Lily staying with a neighbor who had become over the winter months something close to a friend. He sat in the surgical waiting room for 6 hours. Bad coffee, a novel he barely absorbed, the double doors at the end of the hallway that stayed closed and closed and closed. Dr. Foster came out at noon. Nerve decompression was successful, he said. The structural damage is repaired. The prognosis for functional improvement is strong. Edward sat back in the plastic chair and let out a breath that had been building for 5 months. When they let him into recovery 2 hours later, Carol was still groggy, her eyes at half-mast, but she recognized him immediately. Is it done? She said. It's done. Everything went well. She closed her eyes. I'm going to be able to pick Lily up again, she murmured. I haven't been able to pick her up in almost 2 years. He sat with her the way she had once sat with Patricia, quietly, without needing to fill the silence. Recovery was hard and slow and real. Weeks of physical therapy and deliberate, careful movement. Edward hired a home health aide to help during the days. He adjusted his own schedule and appeared at the Glendale Avenue apartment 3 or 4 evenings a week, arriving with dinner, helping with homework, providing the steady presence that Carol and her children had been largely without for too long. Lily began calling him Mr. Eddie immediately, and without any transitional phase, she provided him with significant updates whenever he arrived. He listened to all of it with complete attention, which she found entirely appropriate. As the weeks passed, Edward noticed a very gradual loosening in Daniel, the set of his shoulders becoming slightly less braced, the laughter coming more easily. One Saturday afternoon, when Edward brought materials for a birdhouse Lily had requested, Daniel spent 3 hours at the kitchen table completely absorbed, measuring and cutting and fitting pieces together with the focused pleasure of a boy who has for an afternoon forgotten to be the adult in the room. Edward watched him from across the table and thought that is what a 10-year-old should look like. And he noticed something else in those weeks and months of showing up. He was sleeping better. The waking at 3 in the morning that had haunted him for 4 years was not entirely gone, but it came less often and left more quickly. The house in Worthington Hills, when he returned to it at night, felt less like a place where something used to live and more like simply a house, waiting patiently for him to come back to it the next morning. He did not examine this too closely, but he noticed it. Carol noticed it too. She was a woman who had spent 8 years reading people's conditions, the small signs, the things people didn't say, the gradual shifts in color and posture and energy that told the real story beneath whatever story someone was presenting. She watched Edward across her kitchen table, and she kept what she saw to herself for now, filed it carefully, the way she filed everything that might matter later. Then in late July, a letter arrived from Daniel's school, a recommendation for the district's accelerated STEM program beginning 6th grade. Competitive, application-based, genuinely excellent. The school was 45 minutes away by city bus. Edward found Daniel on the front steps of the building, holding the letter when he arrived that evening. "It's a good program," Daniel said. "I looked it up, a lot of the kids get scholarships." "It sounds exactly right for you," Edward said carefully. "If I go, I can't pick up Lily from daycare anymore. The bus doesn't get me back until 6:30. Daycare closes at 6. He folded the letter along its original creases. "Mom can do more now than she could 2 months ago, but she's not ready for that route yet. So I'm not applying." "Daniel, it's okay, there are other, listen to me." Edward sat beside him on the step. "This problem has a solution that doesn't involve you giving up the program. A home aide can cover afternoon pickup. You not going to the school you should go to. That is a problem I cannot solve after the fact." He talked to Carol that evening. She resisted, as she always did at first. "Let Daniel have this," he said finally. "You spent 8 years making sure other people had what they needed. Let someone make sure your son has what he needs." Carol was quiet for a long moment. "He's been carrying so much for so long," she said softly. "I know, let's put some of it down." She nodded. Daniel applied. He was accepted 3 weeks later. The evening the acceptance letter arrived, Carol was making coffee, standing at the counter on her own, which was still something that felt slightly miraculous, when she caught her foot on the kitchen rug. She grabbed the counter in time and did not fall. But by the time she sat down at the table, she was pale and shaking. Daniel had seen it. He went to her and put his hand on her arm, the way he had 100 times before. Carol put her hand over his and held it. Lily, now 4 years old, came in from the other room, assessed the situation, and climbed into her mother's lap and put both arms around her neck. Carol held both of her children, and closed her eyes. Edward was in the doorway with the acceptance letter still in his hand. He stood there and let them have that moment. And he felt something he had not felt in 4 years. Not like a visitor standing outside something. Like someone who belonged inside it. It was Carol who saw it first. That was the thing about Carol Hayes. She had spent 8 years learning to see what people were not telling her. It was the core skill of the work she loved, reading the patient underneath the patient, seeing past the surface report to what the body was actually doing. She had saved a woman's life once by noticing a latex reaction before it became serious. She had caught infections before they spiked, caught medication errors before they compounded, caught the particular graying around the eyes that meant someone was in more pain than they were admitting. She had been watching Edward for months, not intrusively, not with clinical detachment or the careful distance of a professional observer. She watched him the way you watch someone you have come to care about, in the way that caring makes you attentive. She watched him because he showed up for her family again and again reliably and without drama, and because something in his color had been concerning her since July. He was tired in a way that sleep didn't seem to touch. There were moments, brief, almost imperceptible, where he would pause mid-sentence, not from thought, but from something else. A momentary interruption, she recognized as the body asserting itself over the mind. Twice in August she had seen him press his fingers briefly against his sternum, a gesture so habitual he had stopped noticing he did it. And once in the kitchen in late September while he was helping Daniel with a geometry problem, she had watched him take 3 careful measured breaths in a way that had nothing to do with the geometry problem. She waited, she gathered what she saw. And then one evening in early October, after Daniel had gone to do his homework and Lily had fallen asleep on the couch, she sat down across from Edward at the kitchen table and put her hands flat on the table and said, "When did the irregular heartbeat start?" Edward looked at her. "I'm not guessing," she said. "I've been watching you for 3 months. The fatigue, the way you catch your breath sometimes, the thing you do with your hand on your chest when you think no one is looking. I've seen enough cardiac patients to know what I'm looking at." She held his gaze steadily. "When did it start?" A long silence. "About 2 years ago," he said finally. "My cardiologist has been monitoring it." She said, "When was your last appointment?" 3 months ago. "And since then?" He was quiet. "Edward," her voice was not unkind. It was the voice she used when she needed a patient to hear something they had been avoiding. "You have been managing this alone, the same way we were managing everything alone before you walked into that bakery. And I am telling you, the way you told me about the insurance letter, the way you told me about the rent increase without softening it, I am telling you that what I am seeing is not something to manage alone anymore. You need to call Dr. Hawkins tomorrow morning, not next week, tomorrow." He looked at this woman, sitting in her flannel robe in her small kitchen, 18 months of her own suffering behind her, and a full day of physical therapy and 2 children, and the quiet, endless labor of rebuilding her life, and she was using what she had left to look after him. Something broke open in his chest that had nothing to do with the arrhythmia. "You've been watching me," he said. "Since July," Carol said simply. "Someone had to." He called Dr. Hawkins the next morning. She called him in immediately for a full workup. The arrhythmia had progressed, she told him, reviewing 6 months of data. The new medication protocol would help, but the contributing factors accelerating the progression needed to change. The sleep deprivation, the sustained elevated stress, the isolation. "Edward," she said, setting the chart down and looking at him directly, "your heart has been keeping a tally. Grief is not free. Isolation is not free. 4 years of this is showing up in your data, and I can manage the electrical problem with medication, but I cannot manage the underlying conditions with a pill. Something has to change. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes not from being without people, but from keeping yourself behind a wall so long that you forget how to open the door." Edward Callahan had been behind that wall for 4 years. He had built it himself, brick by careful brick, believing it was protection. He did not yet fully understand that it had become a cage, and that the cage was making him sick. What he did not expect was that the person who would finally see through the wall was a woman who had spent 8 years learning to see what people weren't telling her. He drove to Glendale Avenue that evening and told Carol what Dr. Hawkins had said. She listened to everything without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How long have you been managing this alone?" 2 years. She nodded slowly, the nod of someone who had suspected exactly this. "You came to our apartment in December, and you sat with me for 2 hours, and you answered every question honestly. You told me what you expected to get out of helping us. You were more honest with me that first night than most people are with their own family." She looked at him. "And then you spent 9 months showing up for us and telling none of us that you were carrying this." It didn't seem Daniel. She called toward the back bedroom. He appeared in the doorway in his school clothes, homework under his arm. "Sit down. Edward has a heart condition he's been managing alone. He needs to stop managing it alone. The same way he helped us stop managing everything alone. That is what this family does for each other." Daniel sat down across from Edward. He looked at him with those careful, direct eyes. "What do you need?" he asked. 11 words, the simplest possible question.
Asked by a 10-year-old boy to a 66-year-old man, with no drama, and no hesitation and no suggestion that the asking was unusual in any way. Something in Edward that had been wound tight for a very long time released. "I need to not be alone as much," he said. "I've been alone in that house for 4 years and I've told myself it was fine. It hasn't been fine." "Then stop being alone," Carol said. "We're right here." Lily appeared from the other room, assessed the room with her customary thoroughness, and climbed into Edward's lap. She leaned her head back against his chest. "Are you sad, Mr. Eddy?" "A little," he said honestly. "Okay." She patted his arm. "I'll stay here for a while." "Thank you, Lily." "You're welcome." He took Dr. Hawkins' medication protocol seriously from that day forward. He reduced his board commitments to what was genuinely necessary. He started sleeping. Real sleep, not the 4 or 5 hours he had been running on. He called Catherine and had the conversation she had been asking for, the real one about 4 years of a wall and what it had cost them both. He invited her to come the following weekend. She arrived with her husband Michael and their 3 children, and filled the house in Worthington Hills with the kind of noise that a house built for a family is supposed to have. She met Carol and Daniel and Lily at dinner that Sunday evening, and within 20 minutes Catherine had her arms around Carol, telling her, with complete sincerity, that she was the most impressive woman she had met in years. Daniel and Catherine's eldest son ended up spending 2 hours talking about engineering programs. Lily taught Catherine's youngest daughter a song from school with great pedagogical patience. Edward sat at the head of the table and looked around at all of them, and felt the room blur slightly. His heart, Dr. Hawkins noted at his December appointment, was responding well. The arrhythmia readings had stabilized, the stress markers had dropped measurably. "Whatever you're doing differently," she said, "it's working." "Someone was watching out for me," Edward said, "when I wasn't doing it myself." She looked at him. "Good, let them keep doing it." In December, exactly 1 year after that night at the bakery, Edward arrived at the Glendale Avenue apartment to find it transformed. A small Christmas tree with paper chains Lily had made, lights strung along the window, a paper star at the top, cut and folded by Daniel with geometric precision. The whole apartment smelled like gingerbread. Carol met him at the door, moving entirely on her own, no cane, no wall to hold, careful and strong and completely herself. "You're just in time," she said. "The frosting situation requires supervision." Lily, 4.5 and fully in command of the kitchen table, was working through an entire container of green sprinkles. She looked up when Edward came in. "Mr. Eddy, you're helping." "Apparently," he agreed, sitting beside her. Daniel looked up from his homework and gave Edward the particular nod that boys give when they are genuinely pleased to see someone but have decided that expressing this directly would be undignified. They frosted cookies, they ate dinner, they put Lily to bed together, the 4 of them moving through the small apartment with the easy rhythm of people who have learned each other's patterns so thoroughly that nothing needs to be discussed anymore. Then Carol and Edward sat at the kitchen table with coffee while Daniel finished his homework in the next room. 1 year, Carol said. 1 year. A year ago Daniel was on the street with Lily on his back asking a stranger for expired cake. "A year ago I was sitting in a bakery alone at 9 in the evening because I couldn't stand another night in my own house." She looked at him. "Are you glad you went?" "It's the best thing I've done," Edward said, "in a very long time." "We're not done yet," she said. "Not by a long shot." Spring came again to Columbus, and with it Carol's return to work. She went back part-time first, building her strength carefully. Then full-time, at a supervisory CNA position at a long-term care facility 4 blocks from Glendale Avenue. Better management, better equipment protocols, a staff that had heard about her case through the healthcare network and specifically requested her when the position opened. Her first day back, she came home and stood in the apartment doorway and put both hands over her face and cried. Not the controlled private kind, the real kind, the kind that had been waiting a very long time for its turn. Daniel put his arms around her from one side without saying anything. Lily came from the other room and climbed up and put her arms around her mother's neck. The 3 of them stood in the doorway making a pile of each other until Carol laughed through the crying and said, "Okay, okay, I'm okay. I just needed a minute, a whole minute." Daniel said, completely straight-faced, 2 minutes. Take 2. He kept his arms around her. Take as many as you need. Edward had been coming up the stairs when he heard it through the door. He stood in the hallway and gave them their moment. When he knocked, Lily answered, "Mr. Eddie, Mama went to work and she came home and she didn't fall down or anything." "That is excellent news," Edward said. In October, nearly a year after Carol had first noticed the signs in Edward and sent him to Dr. Hawkins, the legal case reached resolution. The settlement covered 18 months of lost wages, all surgical and rehabilitation costs, future medical monitoring, additional damages related to the equipment failure, and what Marcus Webb described as appropriate compensation for the improper denial process. The specific figure remained confidential. Marcus called it one of the cleaner outcomes he'd achieved, given the quality of the documentation. Carol called Edward when Marcus told her the number. She did not speak for almost a full minute. "Carol, I'm here." A long, slow exhale. "My kids are going to be okay," she said, very quietly. "I mean they were going to be okay regardless, because I was going to make them okay no matter what. But now they're actually going to be okay, not because I fought hard enough against impossible odds, just okay, like other people are okay." A pause. "I can breathe. I don't remember the last time I could just breathe." "You're going to have to get used to it," Edward said. She laughed through the tears he could hear. "This is your fault, you know, all of it. I'll accept that. You walked into a bakery and heard a 10-year-old boy ask for expired cake and decided to care about it. That's why any of this happened. Your son carried his sister on his back all day in the cold trying to get you a birthday cake," Edward said. "I couldn't walk past that. Most people do." "I know." A pause. Then very quietly, "Patricia would be proud of you." He looked at the photograph on his kitchen counter. Patricia at 40, laughing at something just out of frame. He had moved it there from the desk drawer almost a year ago, the night Carol had asked him to talk about her. "I think she sent me there," he said, "to that bakery, that specific night."
"I think so too," Carol said. In February, 14 months after that December night, Edward incorporated the Hayes-Callahan Family Foundation. The name was deliberate, not the Callahan Foundation. Hayes-Callahan because this was a partnership, and because Carol Hayes deserved to have her name on something that helped people the way she had spent 8 years helping people without ever asking anything in return. The mission was focused and specific: legal advocacy, medical navigation support, and emergency financial stabilization for working families facing workplace injury claims. The gap between what the workers' compensation system was supposed to provide and what it actually delivered to people without resources or connections, people the system was designed to exhaust into giving up, was enormous. Edward now understood that gap from the inside. He had read every denial letter. He had watched Daniel call from a payphone with $3 of prepaid minutes. He knew what that gap cost. Carol joined the advisory board. She sat in meetings with attorneys and policy specialists and said things like, "That process sounds efficient on paper. Here is what it actually looks like from the other side of the desk." And the room listened. Marcus Webb led the legal work. Dr. Foster joined the medical advisory panel. Catherine organized the first fundraising committee. The foundation's offices opened in a small suite of rooms on the east side of Columbus, deliberately placed in the neighborhoods where the families they intended to serve actually lived. One plaque at the entrance read, "In memory of Patricia Callahan, who saw people, this foundation sees them too." Edward had written those words at 2 in the morning and read them to Carol over the phone before they went to the engraver. His voice was unsteady. "She would have written it better," Carol said. "She would have, but she's not here. So this is my best effort. It's good, Edward. It's really truly good." The foundation opened in April. The first case came through Marcus Webb, a father on the north side, construction accident, workers' comp denied 3 times. The second through a hospital social worker. The third through a union representative. By the time fall arrived, they had served 22 families, with a waiting list growing longer every week. In October, at the foundation's first anniversary fundraiser, Daniel stood up to speak. He was 11 now, taller, his voice beginning its shift, wearing a blazer Carol had pressed carefully the night before. He stood at the front of the room with the composed ease of a boy who has been the most responsible person in a room for most of his life and has simply learned to be comfortable with that. The room went quiet. "A year and a half ago," he began, "I spent an entire day collecting bottles and cans. My sister was on my back the whole time. She was 3 years old and I carried her every step, the way I always had, because that's what needed doing. By the end of the day I had $4.62. It wasn't enough for a birthday cake for my mom. He paused, so I went to a bakery and asked if they had anything expired, anything that was going to be thrown out that night, and a man in the corner heard me. He looked at Edward, who was standing to the side of the room with Catherine beside him. He didn't just buy my mom a cake, he came to our apartment that night and sat with her for 2 hours. He came back the next morning with groceries and her medications, and he started making calls. He found us an attorney, he found a surgeon. When our landlord raised the rent and we had nowhere to go, he bought our building. He paused. He did all of this because he saw us, because that's who he is. He looked at his hands for a moment, then back up. But I want to say something else, something I don't think gets said enough. The room was very quiet. Edward was alone for 4 years before he walked into that bakery. Really alone, not just no company, but the kind of alone where you stop being fully a person because there's no one to be a person for. He came to our apartment every night that first week, and my mom who was lying in bed with 3 broken vertebrae and 18 months of insurance denials and no money, my mom saw it. She saw that he was not all right. She started watching him the way she used to watch her patients. And after a few months she told him to go to the doctor. She told him his heart was giving out and she could see it and he needed to do something about it. He looked at Carol, she saw him, the way he had seen us. And because she said something, because she was paying attention even when she had every reason in the world to only be paying attention to herself, he got the help he needed. He looked back out at the room. My mom used to say, you see someone who needs something and you do it. She said it about being a nursing assistant, but I think it's bigger than that. I think it's about choosing to actually look at the people around you, to not look away from what you see. A pause. Edward looked at us. My mom looked at Edward, we looked out for each other. And that's the whole thing, that's all it is. He sat down. The applause was long and genuine. Carol put her arm around him. Lily climbed into his lap and put her head against his chest. Edward stood across the room and looked at the 3 of them and felt the room go slightly out of focus. Catherine put her hand on his arm. Patricia would have loved all 3 of them, she said quietly. She would have, Edward said. She absolutely would have. Later that evening, after the donors had left and it was just the 4 of them eating leftover appetizers in the empty event space, Daniel said, in the way he sometimes produced observations that had clearly been forming for some time, "Do you think about her a lot? Your wife?" "Every day," Edward said. "Every single day." "Does it hurt less than it used to?" Edward thought about this honestly. "It hurts differently," he said. "It's still there. It will always be there, but it's become part of something larger. Part of why I was in that bakery on that specific night." He paused. "She used to say that love doesn't diminish when you spread it out, it multiplies." I didn't understand what she meant when she said it. I think I do now. Daniel nodded slowly, turning this over. Lily held out a small cheese pastry to Edward. "Mr. Eddie, this one has the cheese inside. You should eat it." "Thank you, Lily." "You're welcome. It's the best kind." "It is," he agreed, and ate it. Carol met his eyes across the table and smiled, the full unguarded smile of a woman who has come through something hard and found herself more fully on the other side of it than she was before. He smiled back. And maybe that is what second chances really look like, not a single dramatic moment of rescue or redemption, but a long quiet series of ordinary evenings, coffee going cold on a kitchen table, a child's homework spread across the floor, someone asking if you're okay and actually meaning it, 2 people who each thought they were only giving, slowly realizing they had been receiving all along. Outside the windows of the Foundation's event space, Columbus moved through its October evening. Leaves turning, street lights coming on one by one, the first faint edge of winter in the air. The same season that had started all of this, a year and more ago, with snow falling thick on a bakery window, and a boy with his sister on his back, and $4.62, and a request, so small it nearly disappeared into the noise of a cold Tuesday night. Nearly, but not quite, because someone was listening. And because someone else, lying in a flannel robe in a 2-room apartment, reading a library book with a glass of water within reach, would spend the following months watching quietly, keeping count, seeing what needed to be seen. They had found each other, this family and this man, not by plan, not by design, by a child asking for something nobody wanted on the one night when the right person happened to be listening. You see someone who needs something, and you do it. That's the whole job. Daniel, Carol, and Edward's story reminds us of something quietly powerful. No act of kindness is ever too small to matter. A boy asking for expired cake on a snowy night. A stranger choosing not to look away. A mother noticing the pain in someone who came to save her. None of it looked extraordinary in the moment. And yet that single decision to listen, to step forward, to care reshaped 3 lives at once. Because kindness does not travel in only one direction. It circles back. It restores the giver as much as the receiver. Sometimes the greatest turning points don't arrive with noise or spectacle. They begin with a simple choice to see someone, to stay, to help. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to our channel so you won't miss more stories that remind us what truly matters. Tap like and share this message with someone who needs it today. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever experienced a moment when one small act changed everything? Tell us in the comments. We would truly love to hear your story. Thank you for being here with us. We wish you and your loved ones health, peace, and a life filled with steady, enduring love. And remember, when you see someone who needs something and you choose to do it, that's where miracles begin. We'll see you in the next video.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.